Hello, my name is Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about passion, purpose, and the human experience. Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with the generous support of the Wyoming Community Foundation. This is What's Your Why? Today, meet Dustin Bleizeffer, a journalist based in Casper, Wyoming. We will be talking about his work and journey as a statewide reporter and editor. And this is part of the Wyoming Humanities initiative called Why It Matters, Civic and Electoral Participation. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to learn more about you. And especially, I pulled up your bio that you grew up in Wyoming. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Gillette and spent a fair amount of my young childhood also in Wright, Wyoming during the construction of some of those coal mines in the southern Powder River Basin. But I grew up in Gillette and started my journalism career there.
And what drew you to be a journalist?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I was interested in telling stories and in journalism beginning in high school. And, you know, I kind of took a break between high school graduation and my college career. And when I went back to college, I wasn't sure that I would pursue journalism, but I kind of fell in with some folks who were studying journalism. And so, yeah, they kind of roped me back in, and yeah, I've stuck with it ever since.
So what has influenced your life being a journalist? What kind of journalist do you like to follow, and what gives you inspiration?
I think what gives me inspiration is the ability to, first of all, hold those in power accountable, while also to give voice to those who maybe don't feel that they have so much influence in the world around them.
Well, and what was your inspiration, about the things you write about? And you talked about, you like to tell stories, but you also want it to be meaningful.
Well, first of all, obviously, it's really important for newspapers to be the paper of record in a community so that people know more about the decisions that are being made by those who they vote into power. But the really interesting stories, like what really makes a community, are the people who live there and go to work every day, or in other ways, make up the fabric of a community. I don't care how small a town is. Every person in that town has a story and a contribution to the community, and and a viewpoint and a story that's worthy, and interesting.
And how because it says here that you've worked primarily covering the energy industry, but also that you worked as a coal miner and an oil field mechanic. And did that kind of launch you into reporting about the energy industry?
It did. Although my journey to becoming an energy reporter was quite unintentional. It wasn't some grand design. Before I began my college career, I worked for a service company in Gillette that specialized in work for the oil field and the coal mines. And so, during my 4 years there, I did everything from delivering parts to coal mines to working as a mechanic's helper and a mechanic's apprentice, which allowed me to eventually visit every coal mine in Wyoming and a few in North Dakota and Colorado as well. And as a college student, I worked a couple of summers as a summer hire at the Blacklander coal mine. One of those summers, I got to drive, for the entire summer, I drove one of those large coal trucks. And boy, that was an experience. It really gave me a lot of respect for the job.
I bet it's a hard job.
It is. And it's really fascinating. These coal miners, a lot of them commute to work, sometimes almost an hour's drive, to work a 12-hour shift, and then drive home to catch as much sleep as they can before their next 12-hour shift. And, safety is of the utmost importance because it can be dangerous. I mean, these are massive machines. They're moving Earth in ways that, you'll rarely find around the world. In fact, the summer I was working at Black Thunder, I saw some of the largest cast blasts in the world. These blasts were so large, and I stood on top on the catwalk on my coal haul truck, and the Earth turned to jelly below us. It like liquefied the Earth temporarily. But yeah, it's a big job. It's an important job, and not everybody can do it. It takes a lot of training and expertise.
And so even though you became an editor and a reporter primarily in the energy industry, and you said that was kind of an accident, how did that accident happen?
So fresh out of college, I went to work for my hometown newspaper, the Gillette News Record. And I was there for, 2 or 3 weeks before the editor said, has anybody in this newsroom visited a coal mine? And I raised my hand and said, I've been to all the coal mines. And the editor said, great, you're our energy reporter. I had no idea. I should have maybe planned to be an energy reporter, but it worked out. And I'm really grateful because it was the best beat a reporter could ask for in Wyoming. Because, you soon learn about how the energy industry, what it means to the lives of those who work ranches and in agriculture. Sometimes they would work, ranchers would work at a coal mine, kind of supplement their ranching ambitions. Other times, there's conflicts between energy development and mining. And you learn what energy means to just about every other job and aspect of life in Wyoming, and not just in these energy communities either, of course. As we all know, the revenue from energy, supports our schools across the state. So it was a really quick introduction to the rest of the state, even though my first beat was just, right there in Gillette and Campbell County.
Well, I like that you talk about you got to be, boots on the ground and really see how energy and coal mining specifically and the whole energy industry affects people's day-to-day lives. Yeah,
indeed. And not just from an economic standpoint either. These mining jobs, along with oil and gas too, support this really strong kind of industrial service economy that we have that kind of spans from Gillette to Douglas, Casper, and Rock Springs. There's so many companies kind of in that industrial service belt. They kind of spring to life from early oil and gas development, have adapted to servicing coal, and now some are adapting to, perhaps an emerging wind energy industry as well. Jobs wise, it's really been kind of, the backbone of a large part of Wyoming's economy.
Oh, absolutely. And when you're energy reporter, are you just doing stories about the companies? Are you doing, personal stories? How exactly are you reporting about that?
Well, a lot of covering a beat is paying attention to trends in the industry and with specific corporations and companies. But always, these trends and policy decisions impact real people who, sit around their kitchen table and discuss, they have a stake in what happens. That's a new mining permit, or whether it's kind of how to mitigate something like the discharge of water from coal bed methane gas. It touches people's lives in very real ways, whether they work directly in the industry or they live in a community. that depends on energy. So, yeah, I really like to visit with those folks and put a kind of a face and a name to a story to show that this isn't just a policy discussion. It's about our values and a quality of life here in Wyoming and for our neighbors.
And I think that is such an important part of reporting is really giving a face to a story, and not just these are the facts, but really how do the facts touch us?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it's too easy to get carried away deep in the weeds on a policy or budget discussion. These are real people, and these decisions have real impacts on people's lives. Without that, it's really hard to describe why a policy is important or not.
And I think if you're not in that industry, it's hard to imagine or picture yourself in those communities if you don't live right there and are, looking at people in the face and actually talking to them about what's going on. And, because you can't fly at 30,000 feet, you have to be right there.
Yes, indeed. And that was one of the real bummers about the pandemic too, that made, it made everybody's job more difficult no matter what you were doing. But as a reporter, you lost that face-to-face contact to a great degree. I mean, reporters still went out there with a face mask and talked to folks and probably did more interviews outdoors than indoors. I really missed that person-to-person in real-time contact, because that's where emotions and sincerity come through, and just kind of interesting things about a person that you could never, you never get to realize or see in a phone call or a Zoom even.
Oh, exactly. And I feel that all the time as a podcaster, because I was doing all my podcasts in person, and now I've switched over to Zoom, which in a big state like Wyoming is pretty nice for me in terms of podcasting, because I can reach out and talk to a lot of people across the state.
Yeah. And in fact, people are in their vehicles a lot in Wyoming, as you know. And I think that this might not be exclusive to Wyoming, but one of the best methods reporters have to interview somebody is to jump in their vehicle and go for a drive. And usually it's a drive to go look at a ranch that's part of a story, or a drive through some oil field or to a coal mine or what have you. Sitting in the cab of a truck with a tape recorder. I love those kinds of those interviews.
No, I do too. I think that's up close and personal. Well, I want to switch over to learning about the collaborative journalism project that you did with Wyoming Humanities, and the story you chose and why you chose those stories and what you learned. And just tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think the seed behind the idea for my pitch came from a project from about 4 years ago. I just finished my fellowship term as a John S. Knight journalism fellow. And I kind of wanted to take some of those strategies and inspirations to do something new. And so I teamed up with Felicity Behringer, the writer in residence at the Bill Lane Center for the American West. And we wanted to highlight some rural counties in the West that were aging in population and losing their young people to outmigration. And so the first county we wanted to focus on was Hot Springs County in Wyoming, because that stood out in the state as the county with that most clear dynamic of an aging population and young people leaving. And, rather than go talk to the city council or the county commission, The first voices we wanted to highlight were young voices. So the high school principal graciously allowed us to spend an afternoon with some high school seniors in their English class. And so we asked, pretty basic premise, where do you see yourself making your future in 5 years from now? Would that be in Wyoming? And if not, if you were to leave the state, what would it take for you to come back? What do you need to build your future in the state? We learned some things that we were a little surprised about, and that was this notion that there was just kind of a sense of resignation that young people leave the community and that's just how it goes. And so there was just kind of this unspoken love it and leave it sort of arrangement, which felt really significant. That community and the rest of Wyoming should talk about. And so when I learned about this project, this potential with the Wyoming Humanities Council, I wanted to continue that sort of effort. The Wyoming legislature had just convened, and and they get a lot of airtime and print, talking about their reasons for enacting certain laws or pursuing certain measures. And I felt it was a good time to kind of hand the mic over to young people in Wyoming, especially in this point in time where Wyoming's already begun an historic transition, dealing with an historic budget crisis. I thought it was time to ask young folks, first of all, kind of what it's like to be young in Wyoming, and again, do you see yourself making a future in the state? And if not, why? What would you need to do that?
Were they pretty open with you about their thoughts and ideas and feelings about staying or leaving, or just taking for granted that they're going to leave? Were they very transparent?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate. I didn't have a lot of young people decline to participate. I reached out to young people through various channels of civic engagement, trying to find some young people who have been active in their communities in some way. And so that probably raised my chances of finding somebody who was willing to talk to a reporter. So there might be kind of that level of selection bias. But they were very open, and and several said, thanks for asking. I would love to tell you what it's like and what I'm thinking about a future in Wyoming.
So name it, or just tell us about a couple of those stories that stand out in your mind with these students or these young people, and what you learned perhaps that surprised you.
They all reveal certain truths about the state, but there were a few themes that emerged, and I'm thinking about both two of the young people, Megan and Emily. They kind of represent this portion of the young population that assumed straight out of high school that they were going to leave the state and make a future for themselves somewhere else. But along the way, kind of come back to the idea of making their futures in Wyoming based on just kind of learning more about themselves and what they need, and kind of building a network, of trusted people around them in their community. Even though they still felt this sense that they kind of feel like a stranger in their community when it comes to certain social issues and politics and things like that. But yet they were still kind of able to find their network of support and feel comfortable in their role in that community. And so they could kind of right size or more deliberately direct how they want to get involved. maybe not on such a grand scale as, a political race for the governor's seat or something like that, but kind of more close to home types of civic engagement. And by doing that, they said that they now feel more comfortable about their place in Wyoming. And so I thought that was really interesting. Another thing that emerged, though, were some young folks who have been very active in social matters, in Black Lives Matter rallies, getting involved in contacting their lawmakers to advocate for certain bills or against certain measures. There was also a lot of kind of that experience felt like a kick in the gut, and that it was maybe hopeless to try to change or nudge the bigger politics and cultural issues in the state. And so, they're kind of reassessing how they want to be involved or whether they want to be involved in Wyoming in the future.
Even though they're thinking about leaving, they're still thinking about how they can stay. There's two sides of that story, right?
Yeah, and it's not unusual, and it's not necessarily a bad thing either when young folks, leave the state to go acquire skills and experiences, and then a lot of times want to come back to Wyoming. And that's a real value, that's a real asset that young people can bring back to the state. And so some of the young folks think of leaving the state in those terms, and that's really encouraging. And in fact, there's kind of a Wyoming expatriate community out there that follows the news and keeps in contact with friends and family back home in Wyoming, kind of rooting for the state and wondering if they can help in some way that might bring them back. And so I thought that was really intriguing, that there's, once a person leaves the state, that they could really contribute, one day by bringing their worldly experiences and new skills and energies back to the state one day. But yeah, there's also the sense of, there were a few that plan on leaving and not coming back. I had one young person say, okay, I tried, I got screamed and yelled at. I'll just take advantage of the Hathaway scholarship, and then I'll leave the state.
Where did you go to school, Dustin?
So yeah, I went to school in Gillette, and then I went to the University of Wyoming.
So you've been a Wyomingite for forever. So you didn't leave the state?
Nope, not really. No, and my wife and I raised two boys in Wyoming too, and our oldest son just graduated from the University of Wyoming and moved to Denver to get a job in tech.
Good for him. Well, he might be back. There's this thing called the rubber band effect, and I've talked to a lot of Wyomingites, and when they graduate from high school, they want to go out and see the world and leave this, these small communities to have other experiences. And then they get out in the world and they realize how amazing Wyoming is. Even though they might not agree with all the politics, they still come and find their niche.
Yeah, well, I mean, Wyoming's a very unique place. And there's so many outdoor spaces that really kind of becomes a part of a person's identity. They're drawn to that place in the Bighorn Mountains, or along the Green River. Just a physical space becomes so much a part of somebody's identity, and Wyoming has that going for it in spades. And the best quality of life is if you could work in Wyoming, earning a sustainable wage, and if you're fortunate enough, get to travel frequently to those big metro areas and other places in the world. That kind of mobility, that's the best of both worlds in my mind.
Yeah, it truly is. It truly is. And I think uh, with your sons, how what have your conversations been with them? Are they, you know, did they have that kind of desire to, well, I'm here, but I'm going to go and experience the world. I'm going to graduate from UW and do something else.
Yeah, I think so. When you grow up in a place like Wyoming, these communities are very familiar, and after 18 years or so, at least in my experience too, sometimes you feel like, oh, this is so boring. And of course, you want to get out into the world and explore new places and and different cultures and opportunities. And so, yeah, I definitely see them leaving the state, and whether they'll want to come back one day, I don't know. But we talk about it in terms of what's best for you. Really, what's best for you? What's going to make you happy and fulfilled? And if that's moving to Denver to get a job in tech and play in a band, or wherever in the world, that's what a parent hopes for their child. They also want to be close.
We're selfish at the same time. Yes,
there is that side of the coin too.
Yeah. Yep. We want you to go out and live your life, but not too far away, because I need to go see you. I want to know what you're doing in your life.
Yeah, I mean, and when you do move away, make sure it's a really cool place that we want to come visit too.
Truly be spoiled. Have all the best of both worlds in all ways when you live in Wyoming. You have wide open spaces. You can still travel and experience, but you still get to come back to your wide open spaces, which is refreshing.
I will say though, one thing that really struck me about talking to young people across the state in this point in time was, even though they've spent most of their lives here, a lot of these young people, just their sense of feeling alone, not only feeling alone, but sometimes feeling ostracized in their own little hometowns. And there's this notion that, small town life in Wyoming is just like extra friendly, great place to raise a family. But when you're talking to young folks who, and a lot of them come from all kinds of backgrounds, including from the energy, parents working in the energy industry and you name it, they discover that they don't share all of their parents' values. And it just really struck me how in small towns, even outgoing young people who get involved still have this sense that the larger part of the community or in the larger part of the state just doesn't have my back. That was really profound.
Well, what is your answer to that? What do you think we can do for our young people, or especially the young people that you spoke to? What would make a difference in that perception they have, or their reality? What would we do differently?
I think I think that would involve asking young people questions and actually listening and responding. I think there's also a notion that not a lot of young people vote in Wyoming, but as one person explained it to me, when you're young, it's hard to take the time to take on the state's biggest challenges. You're just figuring out who you are. You're trying to advance your education. You're scrounging around for money, and so maybe after college, young people leave the state to establish themselves elsewhere. Then you've lost that young perspective in local elections. You've lost that young perspective and energy on all sorts of community and state level challenges. And so as Wyoming exports its young people, there's every so often we have a boom cycle where others move into the state following the energy. And, a lot of them, some of them tend to stay. That's one way, Wyoming finds itself having an aging population. One young person said, one idea might be, if the state would forgive your student loans in exchange for, working the next 5 years in Wyoming. Well, that might help. That could be an extension of the Hathaway Scholarship Program. And one of the main drivers behind that was to help keep young people in the state. So I thought that was an intriguing idea.
Yes, I do too. I actually like that idea. That would be interesting for Hathaway to explore that, to see how that would work. That even if they just did an experiment with it for a time, it would still be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think our Wyoming workforce development is they're analyzing. I just had another thought that you had asked what might help them see a future for themselves in the state, and I also heard a lot that cultural and social values matter a lot. They want to see Wyoming be more proactive in welcoming the LGBT community and more welcoming to immigrants, and just more willing to put up these flags that say Wyoming's a welcoming place. They don't feel like that's the case right now.
That is truly interesting. It'd be good to talk further with them about that. And I think because they're in that transition place in their life, being in high school, where am I going to go next? You really need young people to take up root and to make a difference.
Equality really matters. It is a theme that I heard. And too often I heard that from a young woman who said that, she doesn't feel safe as a woman in Wyoming, and she wants to feel safe. Those types of values and social justice really matter beyond the ability to have a secure job.
That's what I was saying earlier. If we don't have young people staying to support change and be part of the change, and they leave, then we're still in the same cycle. Nothing changes, because you really need those committed young people who want to remain and want to commit themselves to making changes.
Yeah, this should concern everybody in Wyoming. Losing our young people to all these growing economies around us, it's a real threat to the state's future. This is something that the state really needs to pay attention to, and it's not like, one program can address it. It really takes kind of, a more openness from neighborhood and community level too. That's where it needs to begin. There's also kind of this sense of a disconnect between, the way people live their lives in their communities and the actions that the Wyoming legislature takes. Doesn't seem to be a one-to-one sort of direct correlation is another theme that I heard.
Right. And that's an ongoing conundrum, because I've heard that from women in my First But Last podcast, and it is definitely a matter of what works in a, how do you become part of the conversation, and how do you get inside that circle to make change, and in order to make change, you have to make the sacrifice to be part of the the conversation. And sometimes that's not easy because you have to travel to Cheyenne, for example, and maybe you're a woman and you have 2 children, your kids are in school. It's just not that time in your life that you can just take off for weeks at a time to be in the legislature. So it's a challenge for us, for sure. There's no one magic pill that we get to take.
Yeah, that's true.
So for my last question, I want to ask you, what do you see for your future in your journey as a reporter in Wyoming?
Well, I am I'm very happy because I'm going to return to WyoFile as a full-time reporter. I'll be covering the education beat, which I'm really excited about. Sometimes it's really good for a journalist to step into different roles. And so now I will have been an energy beat reporter, an editor, freelancer, and now learning, looking at Wyoming and Wyoming lives through the lens of education. And so I'm really stoked about that. And I'm also going to launch into a fellowship project this summer that will have me spending the next 4 months launching a journalism project to really kind of advance the discussion in coal communities about how they want to sustain themselves as the coal industry declines. To kind of really push the discussion beyond politics to more practical matters. What assets do we have? How can we use them? What are our values? And kind of really take ownership of that effort so that they can then in turn tell the state exactly what they need. And kind of also, kind of lay the foundation for when federal help can come too, for these energy communities in transition. And so I'm really excited about that project as well.
Wow, you're doing a lot. Good for you. It has been great talking to you, Dustin. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why? Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with support from Wyoming Community Foundation and generous supporters like you. To learn more, go to thinkwhy.org, subscribe, and never miss a show.